peace comes through strength, and strength sometimes you got to bloody somebody's nose,
Yeah.
or you got to show them that I will kick the shit out of you and everything about you if you continue with this behavior. Continuing to give them stuff and say, all right, we'll give this to you, but hey, we want to deter any kind of conflict here and everything. That never works. And if you ask any uh, analyst, expert in Washington, D.C., that's in the intelligence community or anything like that, they will tell you, deterrence through appeasement never works.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. This is Dan Holloway as usual, and today we're joined by a very special guest, John Troxell, Command Sergeant Major John Troxell, technically SEAC John Troxell. I don't know. Did you retire from the SEAC position? Does that mean that you are a retired SEAC,
Yeah.
or is it still retired CSM?
No, it's what's interesting is I retired as the SEAC. I pinned on the rank, the official SEAC rank, 10 days before I retired, and retired as a SEAC. And finally, the Pentagon got our DEER stuff updated and everything. And now myself and the other former SEACs, our DEERs now reflect SEAC as the rank that we retired as, and our ID cards now say SEAC.
So you're not going to get kicked back down to some other rank after retirement, like the guy running for vice president right now.
No, we're solid here, and it's interesting you bring him up because anybody that served at this level or as a command sergeant major and also has served in hard combat, and I don't care what rank, guys like you and others, when you see some of the stuff that's going on there, you can't help but take offense to it, because Dan, you and I served together in the Surge when you were in 2nd Brigade 82nd and I was in 4-2 Stryker just to the north of you.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about all of the flag draped coffins and the ceremonies that we attended for our soul and all the firefights we were in, and the IED incidents we had and everything. For someone to come out and embellish or infer or whatever that they had some kind of combat service, it's a true insult to those men and women that made the ultimate sacrifice, the men and women that are going to live the rest of their lives as bilateral amputees or burn victims over 70% of their bodies, or who have had to serve in those theaters and are traumatized and now are suffering from PTSD and TBI. It's an insult when someone, kind of infers or, kind of embellishes on their service in combat, and especially when it's zero combat.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly not great.
Yeah,
Like I warn people about this a lot, and not just about embellishing service or whatever, but just in general about the way you represent yourself. When you're walking around with that veteran badge on, you're trading on the honor of everybody that's ever had that flag on their shoulder. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And there's good and bad people in the military, just like any other place. So that you should expect there to be a couple of shitbags. And as somebody who is the highest-ranking non-commissioned officer in the entire armed forces, as well as anybody that it's just not true. This idea that only good people and good soldiers get promoted. You know what I mean? Because that's been
right.
kind of one of the rebuttals I've heard over the last couple of weeks. Like, they don't send turds to the Sergeant Major Academy. I'm like, well, I've had a few that might prove that wrong, but it's the 80-20 rule. 20% of any industry is just shitbags,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And that's just kind of how it goes. But anyways, let's get back to you. Where did you grow up? I'm curious about your background.
Yeah, I grew up in Davenport, Iowa, right on the Iowa-Illinois border in an area called the Quad Cities, and joined the Army when I was 18 years old and spent 1 month shy of 38 years on active duty and retired and, served as an armored reconnaissance specialist, spent a lot of years in the 82nd Airborne Division and striker units and in heavy units as well. So I have a pretty diverse background in the military. And fortunately for me, I spent almost 20 years as a command sergeant major SEAC, So all the way from battalion level, all the way up to the senior most position in the Department of Defense. So that's kind of my military career in a nutshell and where I grew up at.
Well, you did you start off as like an 11 mic or something?
No, there were 11 mics at that time, but I was a 19 Delta,
Cap Scout.
Cavalry Scout. Yeah. And my initial duty assignment was in Fort Bliss, Texas, where the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment was at the time. And that's who I was assigned to. It's also where I met my wife. And, we've been married over 40 years now. But yeah, I started off on the heavy side, but, I got a little disenfranchised, enchanted with this clank clank I'm a tank kind of stuff, and that's when I volunteered for airborne school, and in 1987 showed up at the 82nd Airborne Division.
What unit were you in the 82nd?
I was in the Armor Battalion there, 3rd Battalion, 73rd Armor, which went away in 95. Then when the Army restructured to these brigade combat teams, that 373 came back as a cavalry squadron, and during your time, each of the brigades had a cavalry squadron in it, which was kind of what they called a RISTA, a reconnaissance, intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition squadron.
And they brought that back in the, I guess, what was it, 2004 maybe, when the BCTs began again, and we had I think each brigade had a battalion of Cav, and we would each get assigned a company or something like that when we deployed. I don't remember exactly how it went.
Yeah, however the commander wanted to task organize it, but the intent was, we weren't doing large scale combat back then. We were doing counterinsurgency, as you know all too well. But if we were doing large scale combat, that the brigade commander would have an organization at his disposal that could do reconnaissance and security ahead of the fighting formations of those infantry battalions and an artillery battalion, with the key mission of killing the enemy reconnaissance and giving the commander the read of the battle and where to employ those combat forces.
Yeah, that's it seemed like a good idea. The only time that I recall, we were in Badershab, and then we were in Sadr City most of the time. And we did. I do remember one joint op we did. We did a couple of things with you guys, but one of them we did were us and a couple of our buddies from Asymmetrical Warfare Group, whose names are redacted, and you guys cordoned off this village for us, and we came in, we heloed in, and fuck shit up for a little bit. Turns out it was kind of a boring op, to be honest. The one cool thing that happened was. The coolest thing that ever happened to me in the military, and it didn't even involve guns. We were on the back side of the objective. It was me and a couple of Delta guys, my commander, and an ex-Delta guy from Asymmetrical Warfare Group. And the F-16s are calling out, hey, there's a guy running out of the back, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, we don't see shit. There's nothing over here. I don't know what you're talking about. We got night vision. We're looking. We don't see anything. And he's like, all right, cool. Look at your feet. And he put a green laser right at my feet. And he walked me to the house that the guy had walked out of the back of. And I'm like, holy shit, that's pretty dope. I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, and when you talk about competitive advantages over any other nation state or non-state actor, when we are able to do stuff like that with precision that allows you to go in and neutralize the threat and everything. One, the Russians and the Chinese don't have that mid-level management, non-commissioned officer corps that would have that conversation with a pilot. It would be the officer having that conversation. But if the officer is taken out on the battlefield, there is no disciplined initiative because they don't have that mid-level management. We do, where guys like you, when your officer got taken out or, hypothetically got taken out, you could continue the battle because you understood the vision, the intent, and the gist of the mission. And regardless of what happens in the future for us, if we get into a large-scale fight, it's going to be bloody and unforgiving. But in the end, that is going to be our competitive advantage, what you kind of just described right there.
Yeah, and just in a typical raid that we would do, there would be two, three, one, two, three, four people in my group who would be able to communicate with fast movers. Myself, my FSO or fire support NCO, whomever
Yeah.
it happens to be, my commander, and then my JTAC. Like all those people could communicate with him, and that is like we've done partner force stuff before, and we've seen now how China we know a little bit about from their time in Africa, but Russia we're seeing now
Yeah.
how they operate. Russia is nothing. Russia is not like I don't want to make it too political, but the left and the neocon warhawks keep trying to prop Russia up like there's some boogeyman. It's like they've got nukes. You should be concerned about that. Obviously, like nuclear
Yeah.
war is a bad thing, but in a ground war, we would wipe Russia out in a matter of weeks. Like they're
Yeah.
completely incompetent, right? So
Yeah.
I think we should
Yeah.
behave that way. I think that's why Trump was so successful with foreign policies, because he knew that and he actually believed it. And I don't know if I don't know if the left is scared or what it is with them. I know the neocons just want war so they can spend money. I know that's what that is.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the left is just scared. But when you act like a pussy on the global stage, people will treat you like one. The Afghan pullout, for example.
Yeah.
Israel getting attacked. Russia invading Ukraine. It's like that stuff happens when we have weak leadership.
Well, and think of this, Dan. Since October 7th of last year, we've had over 200 attacks in Syria, Iraq, and Jordan on our troops. And on January 28th, there was an attack at Tower 22 that killed 3 American soldiers, 3 Army reservists. And we have had scaled responses. And now you brought up Trump. If you remember back in Syria during Trump's time, when the Russians and Syrians were using barrel bombs, they were dropping out of helicopters that had chlorine weapons in them and stuff like the chemical type weapons. And when Trump saw videos of these Syrian babies suffocating to death, he told Secretary Mattis do something about it. And we dropped 59 Tomahawk missiles on Russian and Syrian regime infrastructure, military infrastructure. And guess what? No more barrel bombs. All right. We dropped the Moab, the mother of all bombs, in Jalalabad, in Afghanistan area, which eliminated thousands of terrorists there, which made those operations that our special operators were doing there much more easier because we were taking people off the battlefield. To your point, though, and I think this Chinese balloon floating across in February of last year really was a big deal. Not whatever it was. It could have been just Mary Poppins on a worldwide tour.
Yeah, and we definitely have the capability to jam whatever signals are coming out of it. That's not even a big deal.
Yeah. But I think it was the Chinese looking for a response. And when we saw that thing over the Aleutian Islands and we still let it come all the way across, irregardless of what it was, and we didn't respond till it got off the coast of South Carolina, that sends a message back to your point that we can't, show weakness on a global scale. We've got to show strength. And strength, in my opinion, is 59 Tomahawk missiles on Russian and Syrian regime infrastructure. Weakness is allowing this vessel to just unfettered, go all the way across.
Yeah.
And save for a bunch of folks in Arkansas with their Mossberg shotguns and their Busch Light, beer bottles that they were throwing at it 30,000 feet in the air. They might even had some hard as fuck seltzer cans that they were throwing in the air. We had no response at all. And to your point, this sends a signal to the rest of the world that, okay, this was a muted response from the United States. Yeah. What can we do now?
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm with you, brother.
Yeah, it's part of, and this as a strategic planner at the highest level, part of your strategy in conducting a war is how the mechanisms of government for the enemy work, right? Like, how does the bureaucracy work? What things have to be done to trigger a certain response? Like for us, for example, in combat theater, this fluctuates depending on rules of engagement and such, but to call in heavy ordnance, you're usually going to get like an 05 or 06 or higher authority for that, right? And the enemy knows that. They know that, right? So if they see a small group operating in a remote area, they know it's going to take time for them to respond with something heavy, and they can plan for that. That's a problem for us that we have that bureaucracy. Now the bureaucracy in some cases isn't in place for the right reasons, I guess. But when it is the point of the military is to seek out and destroy the enemy, right? Close with and destroy the enemy, I guess is what my motto said in infantry school. And anything that gets in the way of that is problematic from my perspective. Now, I know that, the people pushing chess pieces on the board don't feel that way sometimes, but on the ground it can be, as Masterson said, unforgiving rather.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's something that, make no mistake, the enemy strategizes around. If they know that we have feckless, risk-averse leadership that aren't going to deploy the full force of our abilities, then they're going to test. They're going to keep poking and prodding, right? And
Yeah.
that's unacceptable for me. It's unacceptable. Like, we build walls around our civilization for a reason, is to protect it from existential threats. If we let people just hop over the wall, what's the fucking point of the wall?
100%. I talk about this all the time, and the time I spend in Washington D.C., I look to have these kind of foreign policy strategic discussions with different people, and the way to continue to be respected on the global stage is to gain peace through strength. And strength is the kind of things that we've been talking about. And sometimes that means you got to send a statement, all right? But deterrence through appeasement never works. I don't care how much money you give the Iranians, it's not going to stop them from continuing to do the actions that they traditionally do. I don't care how much you try to say, hey, we're getting after a border policy. If you don't do something to hold people accountable that are crossing the border illegally, it's not going to help. And I will tell you, in May, I was down on the southern border, and I was spending time with our Customs and Border Patrol folks and our Border Patrol agents. And Dan, I asked every agent I said, hey, what do you need more of? Do you need more agents? You need more funding, more resources? They said, what we need is consequences. And I witnessed, these military age males jump the fence. They were stopped by agents. They were, biometrically enrolled, and then they were basically released after that. That's this catch and release thing. And, so with about 400 of those folks that are on a terror watch list that this year alone have been let in, that's telling of, the inherent danger now we have at home because of, not enforcing something like you were describing, putting up a wall,
Yeah, I mean, this is what I like to call playground sociology, right?
Yeah.
Bullies will bully until somebody smacks the shit out of them, and then they'll calm down a little bit, and then maybe they need to get smacked again later on. And it is incumbent upon the strong, laissez-faire attitude type to be ready and put aside their laissez-faire attitude from time to time and slap the shit out of somebody. Now, that I don't mean going to Iraq or Afghanistan. I don't think those were appropriate, frankly.
Right.
I'm talking about, let's just start with our own fucking border, right?
Yeah.
But also, if we do have troops stationed overseas in partner countries and stuff like that, and somebody's taking shots at them, or I guess a better example is one that's actually, excuse me, one that's actually allowed by our Constitution, which is when Yemeni rebels start launching shit at our naval vessels, whether they be the actual Navy or commercial shipping vessels.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know this. The Constitution doesn't actually authorize a standing army. As a matter of fact, most of the founding fathers argued against a standing army, and with good reason. But it does authorize a Navy for defense of commercial shipping and transportation, right? If people are running through, if we're going through the Strait of Hormuz and Yemeni rebels are launching shit at us, you have to annihilate them, right?
Yeah.
You have to hit them so hard that it won't even occur to them to do that again, and then you track the money back to Iran and you fuck them up too. Like, those are perfectly reasonable courses of action, but we seem to have this weird relationship with Iran right now. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes in D.C. with that. To be honest, I'm truly in the dark on that, because the way that we've handled Iran in the Obama and Biden administration specifically is mind blowing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that deterrence through appease. And think of this. Obama got us into the Iran deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, where we were giving pallets of money to the Iranians, billions of dollars, with the premise that they would not develop nuclear weapons. And throughout that whole time, all 17 intelligence agencies were reporting that they were, in fact, enriching uranium towards developing nuclear weapons. Trump came in. Trump got us out of that JICPOA, out of that Iran deal, and it caused a major problem with the Iranian economy beyond the problems they already had going on, which had a huge impact on their ability to be the number one state sponsor of terrorism. Yeah, they could still do things, but it was more at a tactical level that they were doing it as opposed to something operationally strategic. And so Iran realized in a hurry that we weren't messing around then, you know, and the Yemenis, a proxy of them, when we were taking our elite special operations forces from the Navy and doing targeted operations into Yemen to get after Yemenis targets, as well as Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula folks, that had a big deal. And instead of missiles getting launched into the Strait of Hormuz or the Bab al Mandeb Strait, they were trying to use these shark boats that were filled with explosives to go out and attack merchant ships and stuff like that. But it severely depleted their ability to have an impact because it was easier for us to defend against small boats than it was against rockets and everything. So I'm with you, brother. And like I said before, peace comes through strength, and strength sometimes you got to bloody somebody's nose,
Yeah.
or you got to show them that I will kick the shit out of you and everything about you if you continue with this behavior. Continuing to give them stuff and say, all right, we'll give this to you, but hey, we want to deter any kind of conflict here and everything. That never works. And if you ask any uh, analyst, expert in Washington, D.C., that's in the intelligence community or anything like that, they will tell you, deterrence through appeasement never works. And as a matter of fact, right after we got out of that Iran deal, Dan, I went to Yemen and visited our elite special operations intel analysts that were there supporting operations in Yemen. And every one of them, 15 of them, every one of them said the best thing the United States could do was get out of that Iran deal.
Yeah. I mean, it's man, I can't believe we did that and did it again. I mean,
Yeah.
it's whatever progress Trump made. It was we took one step forward and 10 steps backwards with this current administration. But you know, it does seem like some of the roots that Trump planted have some of the seeds rather have borne fruit now. And I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, and I think it actually may
Yeah.
carry over into Iran. We'll see. But this guy MBS, um, Mohammed bin Salman, he gets a lot of heat. He's the crown prince of
Yep.
Saudi Arabia. He gets a lot of heat. Um, uh, that tape coming out of Khashoggi getting tortured probably wasn't great for him.
Yeah.
And Saudi Arabia has got a bad reputation in the West in general. But from what I can tell, based on everything I've read and just paying attention to the moves he's made economically over the last couple of years, and then also moves made in conjunction with Israel, of all people, it seems like he's desperately trying to drag that country into the West, into modernity, for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons. Probably because he doesn't want to have to worry for the rest of his life that he's going to get his head cut off by somebody in his own family, right? Fair enough. But they've made a concerted effort to modernize over the last couple of years, and I think being a part of the Abraham Accords, or at least being adjacent to it, is a big part of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, Saudi Arabia is, let's just call it, it's a key ally for us, and in terms of what we were doing to try and get after Iran and everything, when we had the air base there in Saudi Arabia that we could launch stuff out of and everything, um, it was exactly what we were hoping it would be, and MBS is not somebody to mess around with, I mean, MBS was, when I was the SEAC, he was close friends with the Trump family, specifically, Ivanka and Jared Kushner. They
Mm-hmm.
were close friends, and And look at the things Trump did in bringing Arab countries closer to Israel and kind of, tamping down the violent rhetoric and stuff like that, Uh, and when you look at Hamas and Hezbollah and these other proxies, like we were talking about the Houthis, um, they feel emboldened when they see that the United States is going to have a muted response to whatever they do. It's going to embolden them to go after what they really want to get after, and that's to eradicate Israel. And right after Israel, to do things to make sure there's no U.S. influence in the Middle East. So I'm with you. And MBS is somebody that we really got to stay close to. And when the Saudis start talking about, hey, we're going away from the American dollar and we're going to start going other places, that's a huge deal in terms of how that'll affect the American economy. So I'm with you. And I think we've got to make sure if there's a change in administration in November, I think we're going to see a better relationship with MBS and Saudi Arabia. And I'm with you, I mean, you can't have any more Jamal Khashoggi tapes running around because that never does you any good on a global scale. But the bottom line is they are a power player, and the most influential guy in the Middle East right now is the Crown Prince MBS.
Yeah, for sure. And here's the other part of that I think there's some spillover. To be honest, I think that this new Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian is a formidable force. I think
Yeah,
I think he is. I mean, he came in as a newly minted president, and they're hit or miss when it comes to Iran. Ahmadinejad, or how do you say his name?
yeah,
Ahmadinejad, I guess.
Ahmadinejad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
was pretty effective, right? He was pretty effective. The last guy they had in, the former president that is deceased now,
yeah,
was not very good, right? He was an
right.
old guard guy who wanted to fund terrorism, and we see it with Hamas,
Yeah,
Hezbollah, and the Houthis all rising up in the last couple of years. That was all he was doing, in addition to some others, I guess. But this new guy is kind of a moderate, and it's interesting that a newly minted moderate was able to come in and stop Iran from doing something really fucking stupid within a week, right?
yeah,
Like that, to me, that is laying your dick on the table, frankly, for lack of a better phrase. Like I think this is somebody that we need to be talking to. I think it's
yeah,
somebody. I think it's a guy who, like MBS, really wants to drag his country back into modernity. Um, he's the first Iranian president in history that I'm aware of that like appointed women in his cabinet and shit like that. Not that I don't give a fuck about any of that, but for that part
yeah,
of the world, that's a meaningful thing, right? Um,
100%.
I just think we have a rare opportunity in human history right now to build a cult like this brick stuff that's going on. Cannot fucking happen, right? We can't
Yeah,
allow that to happen. It just can't. So I think not only should we, I don't think we should be trying to defeat Saudi Arabia and Iran in the traditional sense. What did Abraham Lincoln say? If I've turned my enemy into my friend, have I not defeated him? Right?
yeah,
I think we've got a rare opportunity right now to do something super meaningful that will have lasting consequences for our culture. But there are a lot of competing interests in DC. A lot of them just want war.
yeah. I agree with you. Now think of this. Um, when Trump was the president, I mean, he had dialogue with Kim Jong Un. He had dialogue with Putin. He had dialogue with these leaders that we, through our national defense strategy, say these are the key threats to the safety and security of the United States. And think of us at the tactical level, Dan. How many of these leaders of criminal patronage networks in Iraq did we have sit downs with? Granted, they wanted to go out and they wanted to grow their poppy and they wanted to do their drug running or whatever, but they would assist us with actionable intelligence on insurgents and terrorists. And sometimes, the phrase is sometimes you got to sink to a certain level of hell to get success.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done that in the past. But Trump's foreign policy, and as much as people want to look at him as crossing at the joint security area into North Korea and everything, and how people are like, what? I can't believe he's doing that. The bottom line is during his tenure, the North Koreans' testing of nuclear weapons was severely muted. all right, because of this kind of dialogue that Trump had with Kim Jong Un. Since the Biden administration has taken over, they've had numerous tests of nuclear weapons in the Sea of Japan and things like that. So um, you're exactly right, and we've got to continue to have these dialogues with these folks. Don't get me wrong, all right. If I had the opportunity, to take down some of these totalitarian leaders and everything as part of a military operation, I'm all in. All right. But in terms of peace through strength and making sure we're not putting men and women in harm's way, we have to have a certain level of dialogue with them to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, when Saudi Arabia announced that they would be shooting down any rockets that came through their airspace, um, people are like, "Well, yeah, they're coming through their airspace." Like, well, I mean, they've allowed them through before, right? It's this is a new thing. So I'm really curious to
Yeah.
see how all this plays out. Um, now on to back, I guess, to domestic issues. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think the readiness level of our current military is?
Well,
Okay, and here, let me ask this in a bifurcated way.
yeah.
Against the enemies we have been fighting, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, so on, and then a near peer, right?
Yeah.
Those are two very
I
different
think
answers.
one, this recruiting crisis that we've had over the past 2 years has had a significant impact on our force to the point now where the Army is restructuring and they're getting rid of all cavalry squadrons. The 19 Delta MOS, which I spent decades in, is going away. We're
What do you mean it's going
restructuring.
away? What do you mean?
The 19 Delta MOS is going to no longer exist. And
I'm sorry,
stateside,
we're getting into
yeah,
personally manned drone warfare. We're going to remove armor from the equation.
we're going to remove cavalry scouts. We are still going to have heavy armored formations, and you're going to have Bradleys and tanks and things like that. But in the 82nd Airborne Division, the 101st,
Hmm.
and units like that, they will no longer have those cavalry squadrons in the brigades. All right. So you're right. Drone warfare and that kind of stuff is going to go a long way to help with reconnaissance and security. But I think it's going to be a problem if we don't have boots on the ground that can do the reconnaissance and security.
Hmm.
So to answer your question is, I think we can still get after uh, counterterrorism, counter insurgent kind of stuff if we have to do that. I mean, we still have forces deployed around the world assisting other nations. These security force assistance brigades are all over and everything. My concern is with what we're doing now, if we get into large scale combat with a China or a Russia and you start introducing hypersonic weapons and some of this other stuff, and then let's say something else happens, there's another kind of emergency somewhere else in the world. My concern is that the force is going to be too stretched. Here's the other thing that gets after, and this is a little philosophical on my part. Um, I think we have an imbalance uh, in the force right now, and I spend a lot of time with the force. The troops are all doing well, and I love being around them, and I'm going to continue to support them. But there's a hypersensitivity in the world right now, in our nation, and it has spilled over into the military. And it's caused some leaders to be over empathetic and over compassionate and not enough discipline and accountability that will maximize our ability to be productive and efficient in our warfighting tasks. And I get concerned about that, because when you have that kind of attitude and that kind of virtue signaling, it creates a sense of entitlement in troops. And when that entitlement is not met because you're in large scale combat or something like that, it could have an effect. So my concern is um, that we don't talk enough about going to combat, going to war now. We're still focused on things that are good for the force, people first, and stuff like this, and getting after the health and welfare of the force and everything. But in the end, you and I both know, Dan, the military exists for one reason: to win our nation's war, to defend our sovereign homeland, our freedom and way of life. And we've got to be preaching that every day to the men and women in uniform. So I think our ability to manage multiple crises might be stretched,
Mm.
especially if one's large scale combat. And then in another part of the world, we may be doing something that similar to what's happening with the Middle East right now, where we're bringing forces back. We just sent another aircraft carrier there. Um, but I think if we were outside of large scale combat, I think we're okay. But the bottom line is we've got to get after this recruiting crisis. And we got to get after the root problems why young men and women do not want to join the military now. And in Troxell's opinion, it's because of what I just described, this imbalance, but also that we're continuing to let politics enter into the military. And, and I see it on social media all the time, these active duty folks arguing over shit that is politics. The stuff you and I argued about is we don't have enough ammo on this range that we
Mm.
want to have. We don't have enough training time to get after our critical skills. We don't get enough jumps in, because of whatever reason. And now I got pay hurts and things
Mm.
like that. Let's get rid of the politics and let's focus on why the military exists. And that's to fight and win
Yeah.
and thrive in a combat and war scenario.
Yeah, it's bad that I've shot more so far this year. It's August 13th today we're recording. I've shot more this year than I did my entire military career on my
Yeah.
own, right? Not good. And I was in the 82nd. We're pretty well taken care of in that regard. But still,
Yeah.
I've shot more as a civilian.
Yeah.
To the other point about the the general attitude of I guess youth these days. I think about MacArthur's farewell speech from West Point
Yeah.
in '62 when he retired. He
Yeah.
said, uh, "Always there are echoes and re-echoes. Duty, honor, country. Today marks my final roll call with you. But I want you to know that when I cross the river, my last conscious thoughts will be of the Corps and the Corps and the Corps."
Hmm.
I just don't see that anymore. And I'm not sure that I think that I see this from two different directions. One, I understand the young person who doesn't believe that this current iteration of the U.S. Armed Forces and American politics have earned their service. I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think they have.
Yeah.
I think they've abused the patriotism of millions of service members from Vietnam to present
Yeah.
to do stupid bullshit that had nothing to do with our country. And I can understand completely why somebody doesn't want to get involved in that. On the other hand, the famous words of G.K. Chesterton are that men didn't love Rome because she was great. Rome was great because the men had loved her, right? And you're going to
Yeah.
get out of your country what you put into it. If you want to have this fatalistic and nihilistic opinion about it and go home and sit on your hands and say that's somebody else's problem, well, it's going to be your problem, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I think of those people in those green tents and in the quads on college campuses protesting on behalf of the Palestinians and worse yet, on behalf of Hamas. And outside of the ones that might be paid shills by Iran and everything, those young, impressionable men and women who truly don't understand what they're protesting against. And what if Hamas is empowered or any other like organization, proxy of Iran, what that would mean to them if it showed up at your front door. And it's not going to be, hey, thank you for, protesting on our behalf. I'm still going to chop your freaking head off. I get concerned with things like that. And so I think the more and more in our nation now, these young folks need mentorship on what it means to be an American, what it means to what patriotism is all about, and and what service before self is, and regardless of what it is, doesn't have to be the military, but doing something to make the world better instead of doing something just to please yourself.
Yeah, and that is a responsibility that lands squarely on the shoulders of us, like
100%.
actual combat veterans.
Yeah.
Everybody that's out there bitching about how bad the military is and how bad the country is and blah blah blah. You're entitled to bitch. You are. There's no
Yeah,
quite. You're entitled to feel whatever way you want. You're entitled to fucking bitch. But what good is it? Are you still are you a net positive for your country anymore? And how
yeah,
do you feel about being a net negative about it? You really should think about that.
yeah. I agree. You know, I was on a flight back from I can't even remember what it was at, but it was one. It was a border city, and I was sitting there. You know, because I fly all the time. You know, I'm normally one of the first ones to get on the aircraft, and so I'm standing there, and the agent, there was all these illegals that were getting on this flight, and they were heading to Seattle, and there might have been 15 or 20 of them, and they brought them all forward. They gave them all a free meal, and they put them on the aircraft ahead of everybody else. And so when I questioned that, I said, "So all of these folks are sitting in economy sitting, they are seating." And they said, "Yeah." I said, "And those meals are free?" "Yes." I said, "Well, what about the American citizens that are in economy? Do they get free meals?" "No, they have to pay for their meals." And to me, that told me right there, is this the direction we want our nation to go? That when somebody violates our laws and enters this country illegally, that we are going to treat them with kid gloves, and we're going to throw that treatment on the backs of American taxpayers. And in the end, we're harming the citizens of this country more so than keeping these illegals out or doing something that protects our nation. And if we keep going in that direction, you know, my concern 50, 100 years from now is my great great grandchildren, will they be speaking English? Will they be speaking Russian, Chinese? What will happen if we continue to get after the fabric of our nation and continue to fissure it to the point where it breaks
Hmm.
and we're no longer the United States of America?
Yeah, I don't know if you watched Trump and Elon Musk or listened to it last night, but
No, I missed it.
one of the
Yeah,
things Elon said was we have too much empathy for criminals and not enough empathy for victims anymore.
yeah,
And I think you can map that on to the way that we handle immigration more broadly. We have too much empathy for people who are not us. You know, like there's a reason for some for some reason sociologists have demonized the idea of othering.
yeah,
And it is like being a cunt to people is not acceptable. There's no reason for that shit, right? Like
right,
one of the principles of the show is I'll do something every day to help my country, my countrymen, or all men, right? We are responsible for one another. There's a certainty, but we are responsible to the ones closest to us first. And what does
mm-hmm.
it say about a person or a country who abandons its responsibility for those closest to them to go help somebody else? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. That is
Yeah,
cultural suicide, is what it is, right? It just doesn't like
yeah,
you won't see that anywhere else in nature.
yeah. I agree with you, and we need more of that. You know, more of looking out for each other and everything. But instead of trying to cater to all the people here that are illegal, or trying to stretch the First Amendment rights as far as we can to the point where, you know, Minneapolis is burning down, or the Chop Chaz zone is established in Seattle and things like that, or um, you know, that the southern border is wide open and anybody and everybody, to include people on terror watch lists, can come across unfettered and enter into American cities and towns. And now we have a homegrown threat that we created, you know, because of a lack of a secure border, a lack of legislation that gets after securing the border, but worse yet, a lack of executive orders that can immediately put a stop to some of this senseless illegal crossing.
Yeah, I mean it's again that's another thing that I just don't from a from a practical like reason standpoint. I
Yeah,
don't understand it. It doesn't. Some people refer to it as toxic empathy. You know what I mean? It's like having an
yeah,
abusive boyfriend or some bullshit. I don't know, but
yeah,
um, why on earth would you surrender your sovereignty or your security for people that have the ambition to annihilate your culture? I just don't get that. I mean, the standard
yeah,
used to be that, and Reagan said this in his farewell address, by the way, is like you can move to Germany and you'll never be German. You can move to France, you'll never be a Frenchman. But you can move to America no matter where you came from, and you can become an
yeah,
American if you accept these ideals. because that's what
That's right.
America is. America is not a race.
Yeah.
It's not a race. It is a set of ideas that anybody can adopt, right? You treat
Yeah.
people well, and you believe in individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship, and that's it, right? That
Yeah.
that everybody remembers the rooftop Koreans in L.A., but
Yeah.
that archetype is all over the place. Indian people coming here and becoming doctors and having wildly successful first, second, and third generation doctors in their families. That's what America is, man. It's not a bunch of fucking it's not a bunch of people protesting for some country that doesn't even exist. Like, I don't give a
Yeah.
fuck about Palestine. I don't care about
Yeah.
Israel either, frankly. Like, neither one of those are America. I care about America. I don't give a fuck about anywhere
Right.
else. But coming here and refusing to assimilate, and then whining that you don't get enough from the government, and then protesting that you because you want to affect our politics, like, get the fuck out of here, man. That's
Yeah.
not
I'm
like
with you, brother.
nobody's ever
Yeah.
done that. No, we've never had an immigrant set do that before.
Yeah. And because we allow that, it further empowers them. You mentioned people from India. I have a lot of Indian American friends that grew up in India, and every one of those people are like you said. They're doctors. They are big business people, and a good friend of mine. He runs four different businesses, and he works his ass off 7 days a week to provide for his family. But it's not just him providing for his family; it's providing for future generations
Mm.
of his family that grew up in abject poverty and squalor, in Punjab, India. So the American dream is alive and well for people that come into this country and, as you described, assimilate to what our uh, Constitution says, what our beliefs are, and what this system is all about, and what being an American is all about. But people that are coming here to just get free shit, and to when something ain't right, to be able to break the law and expect to get released without bail and never end up in trial, it's taken our country down a road that could be complete destruction. And when I hear political leaders say, hey, socialism, is neighborliness to some folks, I think that's a crock of bullshit.
Mm.
All right, so I'm supposed to make myself and my family suffer. So for somebody that might have moved in next door to me, who's living free off the government and everything, so that they could have what I worked my ass off for, fuck that. That's bullshit, and that is not the American way. The American way is when we can help and how we can help others and our other fellow Americans is what we do. But it should not be to at the point where I'm putting myself uh, into poverty or those around me, and certainly not for future generations of my family. So I'm with you on that, brother. And we got to get it fixed, or it's going to get worse and worse.
It's definitely going to get worse because Trump was 100% right.
Yeah.
Criminals, rapists, murderers are getting sent over here. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Central American countries are releasing criminals into this country. That is an like non-disputed fact at this point. Trump knew it in 2016, 2017 when he took over. And so did all the leftist politicians and the media that came after him. They all saw the same intelligence reports that Trump did. All of them did. They know that it's true. And sometime in 2013, the intelligence community let us know that this was happening, that El Salvador, Venezuela, a couple of other countries were literally emptying their prisons and sending them to America in caravans. Like to all these military-age males that got released and there's no woman or child to be seen, those are all people
Yeah.
from jails. They're people who are in prison. Obama knew it was happening in 2013, and that's why finally, after years of unfettered access to our border, they finally shut it down. And he ended up deporting more people than all previous presidents combined at that point.
Yeah.
And then Trump comes in, and he just reiterates what Obama knew, right? What the entire
Yeah.
intelligence community knew, what all the media must have known, they had to know, and definitely all the Democratic politicians know, which was that any weakness in our border policy is going to result in certain Central American countries and South American countries sending their criminals to our country. That's it, right? And he's racist,
Yeah.
right? Like these people care so little about our country that it's more important to keep their oligarch political families in power, right? and
Yeah.
keep the money train going than it is to actually protect our borders. This is the most, and it's weird too. It's like, what do they think is going to be the result of this? Like,
Yeah.
do you think the Haitian dude is going to stop him like, oh, you're a Democrat, I'm not going to cut your fucking head off? Like, no, man, they don't discriminate.
That's right. Yeah. You know, what's interesting, what you just said. So when I was the SEAC under Trump, the number one murder capital of the world was Tegucigalpa, Honduras. And since 2019, they've had a significant drop off in murders and, physical violence. And why? Because those criminals are allowed to leave and they are, get into these caravans and they're heading to the United States. And it's not just Honduras, El Salvador, and some of these other countries down there on the border of Mexico are the same way. They're not going to send their politicians, or excuse me, their doctors, their scientists and stuff like that to this country. They're going to allow these people out. And so, well, and then look at how many people are crossing illegally now that are from China and from Africa and in the
Yeah.
Middle East and things like that. It's just
Chinese crossings are up like 3,000% right now.
yeah, yeah. And when you start seeing Chinese enclaves start up outside of Minot Air Base, North Dakota, or other areas like that, it's not just, man, we're Chinese citizens. We want to buy land in North Dakota. No, it's because of that critical infrastructure that resides on that air base and their ability to influence it if there is a large scale fight.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, we are fortunate in a lot of ways in this country to have one, to just have the Second Amendment in general, but then two,
Yes.
and maybe nature just works this way. It's easy to see when in a forest when you see the cycles of seasons and things like that, or over the course of multiple
Yeah.
years, and how things like nature tends to take care of itself pretty well. It finds homeostasis pretty well, and maybe it's the case now. Maybe all of this, all of this, just war hawk bullshit over the last 20 years has been
Yeah.
for a reason, right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm not a particularly religious person, but there does seem to be some providence in the fact that we're facing existential threats right now, and we have tens of thousands of gunfighters walking around ready to fuck shit up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's the good news. And those folks in Arkansas, those rednecks in Arkansas shooting at that balloon and throwing beer bottles at it when it's 30,000 feet in the air, that gave me confidence that if something did happen, if there was a overt invasion into our homeland, that there are going to be millions upon millions of Americans who believe in that Second Amendment and got lethal shit in their house, and they are going to take up their arms and they're going to defend not only their property, but they're going to defend this nation. I'm confident of that.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's gonna be a problem for anybody that wants to step on their toes. To be honest, a big problem.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we'll all be stacking bodies in our front yard then.
oh
And
yeah,
we'll,
this whole thing going on with the UK right now, and even the UN has stepped in. Like the UK Prime Minister literally threatened to extradite people from the US for Facebook posts. Like, dude, I will fucking cut your head off. Are you kidding me? I'll put you on a Jihad Johnny fucking video on your knees. You get the fuck out of here. And like I don't have a problem with UN troops because half of them are fucking ours anyways for the most part. But,
yeah.
if I need to collect some Robin's Egg blue helmets, I'll do that too. Frankly, like
Yeah.
don't fuck with people that want to be left alone. That's like a number one rule.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that guy wasn't causing you any problems. Just leave him alone. Go
Yeah.
play your stupid, silly games with your leftist friends or whatever, and you guys can have your little party. I just don't. What do they think is the outcome of this? It's never worked for an aristocracy in the entire history of humanity. It's never worked to keep needling the people who want to be left alone. It's always resulted in some kind of fucking revolution, including in our own country just 250 years ago. We're relatively young
right.
here.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, some could say this is still an experiment here, of democracy and the United States of America. But I'm with you. And, this is kind of similar to in a military context, the guy that always, loads the organization on their back and says, I'll carry it to the objective and employ it and fight and win. And that person that's always sucking it up and driving on, we're a little bit more harder on that person than we are the ones that are kind of touchy feely
Mm.
or, fluffy and stuff like that. When we should be recognizing this hard worker over here and letting them do their thing and putting the hammer on the folks that potentially could get us killed. And what I see in the UK is an absolute embarrassment when I see these shop owners and folks, normal citizens that just want to be left alone in pubs and everything, and they've got to deal with all this shit. And then if they retaliate, they can get thrown in jail. It's unbelievable. And then, like you said, a Facebook post could get you extradited. Well, let's see how that works out.
Yeah,
All
good
right.
fucking luck, dude.
Yeah, you ain't got enough black Chinooks to land in my backyard and get me out of here. So,
We'll have to break. We'll have to have a fucking e-tool party, I guess.
that's right,
Um,
brother. That's it.
Before we get out of here, tell me the e-tool story for the. I don't. Maybe the audience doesn't remember, but I always enjoy it.
Yeah. So, you know, um, this was when Mattis was selected by Trump to be the Secretary of Defense. He came in. Trump had his national security strategy that was all about getting after the nation. Mattis's national defense strategy, was focused on winning wars and winning fights and everything. And Mattis came to me early on and he said, "Hey, get the word out to the troops. We're not just going to defeat any threat to the United States. We're going to annihilate it. All right. If they want a shot at the title with the United States of America, it's going to be bad for them." And so the more I was out, getting after promoting this new national defense strategy and the focus we were getting after, I knew I needed to send a message to the troops that was mainly for inspiration to let them know in the areas like Somalia, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, places like that, that we knew the hard work they were doing and we hadn't forgotten about them in Washington D.C. So I was having a conversation with a Delta Sergeant Major when I was in Raqqa, Syria, watching the SDF and take the wood to ISIS's ass and everything. And we kept talking about professional development of leaders, non-commissioned officers, in a combat context, and that in the end, your mark as a professional is how effectively you can execute combat operations and thrive in combat by inflicting as most pain on the enemy with the least amount of loss on your own side. And however that plays out, by shooting the enemy or whatever. And we kept talking about the entrenching tool. We had just watched that movie Platoon where Tom Berenger, had taken the entrenching tool to North Vietnamese. And we kept using the entrenching tool. And so, trying to echo what Mattis was saying, I was on the rooftop of this building with all these Delta Sergeant Majors and watching the fight. And ISIS, a very resilient enemy, coming back with vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, female suicide bombers. And finally, I said, you know what? These assholes have two options. They can surrender or die. And one of the sergeant majors said, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, we're a peace-loving nation, and if they surrender, we'll treat them humanely, safeguard them to a detainee holding facility cell, provide them, chow and a place to sleep and everything, and we'll give them due process in a court of law. But let there be no doubt, if they choose not to surrender, then we're going to kill them with extreme prejudice, whether that's dropping bombs on them, shooting them in the face, or if need be, beating them to death with our entrenching tools." And so one of the guys said, "Hey, you ought to put that in your report to General Dunford and Secretary Mattis." So I did. And Mattis responded and said, "Keep saying that. That echoes my annihilate the enemy." So I kept saying it wherever it was. It was never a big deal until I was on Bagram, Afghanistan on a USO tour on a stage, and I'm holding an entrenching tool in my hand, and I'm giving that speech, and there was a Washington Post reporter in the audience, and he comes up to me afterwards, far left kind of guy. "Hey, I can't believe you just told the troops it was okay to go out and commit war crimes." I said, I didn't do anything of the sort. I said, "We train soldiers, Marines, and battlefield airmen and special operators how to use non-standard weapons to kill." And he said, "Well, I'm going to do a story on this." And I said, "Knock yourself out." And I went to my PAO guy, Rob Couture, and I said, "Rob, what should we do?" And he said, "Let's do a social media post and let's beat him to the punch." And So we did that post, put a picture of me holding an e-tool, and it went viral. I mean, it went crazy all across the world. Foreign news media picked it up and everything. The Fox 5 did a special on it. I was criticized by CNN, ABC, New York Times, folks like that. But in the end, Dan, it did what I wanted it to do. It inspired the troops and the people that know true combat and have had to face the hardships, like guys like you and I and millions of other Americans that have been in harm's way, understand that that is what we stand for as American service members, that we are going to go into a fight and we're going to win. It may take us, a while to get there. We may get our nose bloodied, but in the end, we're going to use everything and every means necessary to neutralize that threat and protect our freedom, our homeland, our way of life, and most importantly, the men and women around us that are our battle buddies. And that's how it went out. And again, the far left criticized me on it. I caught a lot of flack from folks in Congress and stuff that were on that side of the aisle. But everybody else, to include Trump, Mattis, Dunford, and the vast majority of military leaders that are in the business of fighting and winning, had my back.
Yeah, I mean, the my understanding was that the first rule of war was to kill your fucking enemy. I mean, if you got to beat that motherfucker to death with a rock, who cares? What difference does it
Yeah.
make how he dies? Like, what a silly
That's what
thing.
the Indians are doing to the Chinese on those border crossings because they don't have bullets on those border skirmishes, so they're beating them to death with rocks.
It's effective, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, God, what a silly thing to have. Um, the person responsible for motivating the entire force in some ways be criticized for telling them to go kill the enemy. That's a new one right there.
the troops loved it. I mean, I was getting cards, letters, notes. I've signed over 6,200 entrenching tools in 5 years. Everywhere I go, people have an entrenching tool. They want me to sign it and everything. And again, Dan, to your point, it was to inspire the troops. And that was what my role was as the SEAC: inspire the troops. And then through my actions and things like that, maybe intimidate the enemy a little bit,
Mm.
that they won't want a shot at the title. And I think that kind of talk, especially from senior enlisted folks, for whatever reason, they think if Troxell says something like that, then the Iranians are going to attack us, or the Russians, might, the anti-terrorism operation zone back then, they might just go ahead and attack the entire Ukrainian nation. No, they went after the entire Ukrainian nation when they felt that the United States was in a place that we would not respond
Mm.
with troops and everything. And that's why Putin felt comfortable doing that. So the more that we don't have that kind of language in terms of what we're going to do to the enemy or to any threat to the United States, the more it's going to be a permissive environment for state and non-state actors to do whatever they want to us. And let there be no doubt, those non-state actors are coming across the southern border every day in droves, and they're attacking our troops in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan right now. And they're continuing to look to build competitive advantages economically and in the information domain that will weaken us overall. So I'm with you. We need more of that. And we need more of, fuck you, we will kick your ass,
Mm.
and it will be bad.
Yeah, yeah. It's worked for a good while now. I don't know why
Yeah.
we would change that
Yeah.
one up.
It's proven effective,
Yeah.
brother.
All right, we got to get out of here. Tell everybody where they can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, so they can go to my webpage, pmehard.com. They can also find me on all social media, minus TikTok. I'm not a fan of TikTok because of the thing with ByteDance and everything. But John Wayne Troxell on Facebook, Instagram, on X, and on LinkedIn. And eTool Nation, you can find that on Instagram as well. It's my nonprofit now. It's how I give back to veteran organizations and veterans in need. I'm also a sponsor of veteran athletes, and I use my eTool Nation as a means of allowing them to get after their athletic endeavors with some monetary support.
Great. Well, thanks for coming today, man. I appreciate your time.
Dan, it's always an honor to be here with you, brother. Keep doing what you're doing. You are an icon for our nation, and for all of us veterans. So thanks, brother.
Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, kill your enemy however you have to.
That's right.
Thank you all for
Boom.
listening. This has been Citizen.